Do you know what? Let's just get on with it. Ladies and gentlemen, your guest this evening, Mr. Joe O'Donnell. A round of applause, please. Welcome.
Tony,
have a seat.
now what are we going to do with this fella?
What are we
It's
doing?
way beyond his bedtime.
Oh, I tell you what, here, look, stick him in there, will you?
Sorry about this, reminds me of Eugene and Finnegan. Where me head, Eugene?
There you go. We'll see him later. Oh. Well, Joe, welcome. I just have to pick up a little bit earlier on, perhaps, than RTE, because in the introduction we were given perhaps a tantalising glimpse by Charles of a life gone by. Let's talk a little bit about this thing that Charles talked about, this Edgar Benyon character and bamboozling. And you've written about this elsewhere and what a profound effect it had on you. So, who was he and what was bamboozling?
Edgar Benyon was a New Zealander, an illusionist, a magician, who had a full evening show, which he toured during the war years, well, let's say the Second World War years. He toured England, and then when the war broke out, he came over to Ireland, and he toured throughout the year. During the summer months, he would have the whole thing in a tent, and it was a 2.5-hour show, and it had everything in it. It had a jungle-bred lion. Jungle-bred lion, it said so on the bill, and he had all sorts of material, including jungle-bred dancing girls who were very, very popular as well. And I don't know, he was terribly popular with the Irish people, and I have a feeling that it was one particular trick that he did that made him very popular. It was called the cornucopia of everything, and he would have a cornucopia, a paper cone, show the paper cone, and he would produce little bags of tea, which he would throw at the audience. And you might say, bags of tea, but remember, tea was rationed during that time. And he would pull out the little bags of tea and throw them. And he also had, what was he called, the kettle of plenty, a small kettle in which he poured out any drink called for. So it was a case of, Charles, sir, you'd like a whiskey? Yes, good. Would you like some soda? Soda, whiskey and soda. And the guy said, gin and tonics, 2 gin and tonics, 2 gin and tonic. And this was the way he did the whole thing. Now, I don't know whether it was that made him so popular with the Irish. Quite possibly it was, and the tea. But he was there. I saw him at 7 years old. How I got to go to a theatre at 7 years old is another long story. But I saw him in the Capitol Theatre in Dublin, and it was the most amazing thing. I knew this was something. I had never been to a theatre before. The whole atmosphere of the theatre, including the jungle-bred lion and the jungle-bred dancers, was quite amazing. I knew, quite honestly, that I wanted to be a magician, and that followed with a request to Santa Claus, which was duly honoured with a magic set that Christmas. And after that, it was just on my own, getting books from the library, buying books in Woolworths, making my own props. I didn't believe there was another magician in Dublin. It wasn't until much, much later that I discovered that there were 2 magical societies, the Mystic Circle and the Society of Irish Magicians.
It wasn't, though, the first sort of heavenly intervention, was it? Because, you had that sort of sudden introduction to magic, but then it came from another direction as well, sort of from above, didn't it?
It did. And I can only, as you said, it was a divine intervention. A friend of my mother's, Mrs. Canavan, who ran a butcher shop in Glasnevin, she was a friend of the parish priest there, a man called Father George Henry. Now, I don't know whether the word George Henry, when you to a certain age, they say, oh, that George Henry, yes, that George Henry. He was a magician too, a small little gnomic man with white hair around, not unlike Benyon himself. And he was a magician, and he also was a ventriloquist. And he used to give the sermons on Sunday in Glasnevin with the ventriloquist doll perched on the pulpit. I would love to have seen that. I never did. And she mentioned him. He said, well, he needs to be join the society. He was in the magical society. He said, bring him, tell him to come along. And he mentioned the night. Now, funnily enough, we're on the cusp of Lent. So it was during Lent, and I arrived. And the Dominicans had been given the sermon, the retreat during the week. And there, when I came in to show my few tricks to Father George, was Father George, who was brilliant and all around the place. And these 3 Dominican white-robed monks, it was like the Inquisition. But they were great. I did my little routine, and he was delighted. They were all very, very charming. That, and Father Henry said, "Now sit down there now, and we'll get you something to eat." And the housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle, sort of, I would imagine, maybe not, came in, and she had trays of sandwiches and cakes and that. And I said, "Oh no, Father, I can't," because remember, I came from a strict Catholic family, and we were doing the Lenten fast, which was a certain number of ounces of food you were allowed to. And I said, "I've had my collations for the day." And he said, "Oh, don't bother with that nonsense. We don't bother with it here." And the monks all tucked into this with great delight. And he introduced me to the Society of Irish Magicians and the Mystic Circle, both of which I joined, and suddenly was open to a whole different world. And magic became a great part of my life then, the actual doing of magic.
And Joe, I mean, from the age of 7 through to 15, I mean, there had to be some outlet. Presumably, you weren't just performing in your bedroom or for the priests of Dublin.
No.
Where were you actually getting this outlet?
Once I got into the society and the Mystic Circle, I found I had a fairly good act, and I was beginning to get in demand. And there were loads of platforms in Dublin. There were concerts every Saturday and Sunday nights in a dozen halls around the place. You're spoiled for choice. And there were also private engagements, cabarets, dinners, and the big thing was the smokers. Now, when I mentioned the smokers when we were putting this together, you I don't know.
Never heard of it.
It was a function that was held in I don't know whether any of the older members, God, you'd have to be really old to remember the smokers. They were gentlemen-only occasions. Now, nothing sleazy. These were honest to God. They had a good meal. They had their cigars and their cigarettes and their tobacco. There were no ladies because ladies didn't smoke in those days, you see. And so they had these, and they had a sing-song afterwards with a great pianist, and a lot of them were from musical societies, bits of opera and bits of popular songs, and then they had 1 or 2 guest artists, and there were 3 a night, Friday and Saturday nights, and frequently you'd be running from one to the in hotels. The big one was the Grosvenor Hotel in Western Row opposite the thing, and that's where I did smokers, and that's where I developed this act.
So even at that young age, you were a very busy magician by the time.
Absolutely.
And did you at that stage have a stage name or?
Oh yes. It was called. I was called J.Dini.
Okay, I can see where that comes from. And tell me, what sort of magical stuff did J.Dini do?
Well, I'll tell you what. I had an introduction for J.Dini, and that would be my introduction.
That would also not be in the script for this evening.
I'm sorry. Come on.
Okay.
Just read it. Read that bloody.
I knew this was going to happen at some point. Right, so I have to read this, do I?
You have to read this.
This is my big moment.
This is your big moment.
No, I'll stand up for this in that case. Okay, right. Ladies and gentlemen, smoke rising, yes. We didn't think our next artist was going to appear. In fact, up to a few minutes ago, there was no sign of him. I was standing outside waiting for him when a taxi raced in and pulled up with a jerk. The jerk got out and here he is. Ladies and gentlemen, will you welcome please, J.Dini.
Excuse me. The great J.Dini.
Ladies and gentlemen, you welcome please the great J.Dini. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you all here. First of all, I would like to point out. Second, I would like to say this. Thirdly, I would, for those of you who are hard of hearing, I would like to repeat that. And now a few short words. If, and, but, the, yes. Here's a joke for the telepaths among you. You've heard it before. And for the paranoid among you, I'll just say, he is behind you. Here's a trick, or rather a trick about a trick, which I saw very early in my career, and I really enjoyed it. And it was a trick where the magician took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards. He threw away 1, 2, 3. This is an expensive act. He threw away 3, and did a little flick, and I think it was the flick that did the trick, because when he counted again, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards. Now, I was so astounded at this, as indeed were you, that I forgot to applaud. Sounds like sympathy. So I learned this trick, and I said, come tonight, I must do something like this. Maybe they don't enjoy it, but maybe they've seen this before, Tony, you know? So the only way to find out was say, anyone who has seen the trick where the magician takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards, he throws away 1, 2, 3, does a flick, and it's the flick, Charlie, that does the trick, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards. Anyone who's seen that before, say aye. Aye. Okay. Anyone who has not seen the trick where the magician takes 5 cards, throws away 1, 2, 3, and still has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards left, say aye. Aye. Anyone who doesn't give a fiddler's how many cards the magician throws away and how many cards he has left, say aye. Okay, now we know where we are. So, you've seen nothing yet. So I said, maybe I'll bring this trick along, but I will do something else that is to this trick that is kind of different. And I thought, place it on its head. That'd be a good idea. What about we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards you throw away? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Give a flick, because it's the flick that does the trick, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards left. Wouldn't that be good? Unfortunately, I can't do that trick. I never learned it. I just know the one where you have 5 cards and you throw away 1, 2, 3, and you still have 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards left. That's another trick.
The great J. Deeney, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for the grade, yes.
So already by the age of 15, you're performing in these very, very respectable smokers, as they're called.
Yes.
You're doing so. Did you have a day job?
I did indeed.